Alright, today I'm going to talk about my new move rating system. I thought I'd put on a random game in the background. This is Akiyama vs. Rei from a while ago. That's all not important, just thought there should be something in the background. So, a while ago, I developed this rating system that I called Quality. And the way Quality rated moves in a game was it took, after each move, how many winning moves, tying moves, and losing moves are available to the opponent, and it said, okay, based on having looked at hundreds of games, if there's 17 ties and 7 losses, what are the frequency they lose? What's the frequency they tie? What's the frequency we win? And it has some other inputs, like it knows what it thought the previous turn and it uses that to stabilize. And it's got some other things, but it sort of gives the odds of each player winning throughout a game. And then it credits each player with the changes. So if it thought, based on the opening hands, if it thought you were 55% to win, and you play your starter, and now it thinks you're 60% to win, it's going to credit you as plus 5%. You've increased your odds 5% of winning. Then the opponent makes a move, and they make a good move, and it goes back to 55%. Your move increased your odds 5%, but their move increased their odds 5%, and we have net, both players have helped their odds plus 5%. You could have also made a bad starting move and they make a bad reply, and that could also end up at 55% after the first two moves, but it would credit both players as hurting their chances rather than helping. There are, however, a few kind of big disadvantages to this system. One, in a tie game, it's always going to end up at 50%, give or take. For a first turn win, it's going to end up at 100%. For a second turn win, it's going to end up at 0%. So if it ends up at 50%, it's basically, slight differences depending on who it thought was favored by the hands, but it's basically going to end up thinking both players played equally. And we have all played ties where we know, one player clearly made the better moves and the other player played well enough to hold on and deserves credit for that. Or times when someone saved a really bad random that maybe it doesn't realize was as bad as it was. There's all kinds of reasons. When someone wins and the other person loses, it has to go from 50 to 100%. And so it has to assign that 50% to one or the other of the players. Sometimes it assigns more of it to the winner playing well, sometimes it assigns more of it to the loser playing badly. But in general, that means it's basically always going to think a winner played well and a loser played badly. And I don't think that's always true either. So I think it has some strengths. I like it. Once you get big samples of games, I think it's pretty interesting and useful. But I don't think it's very predictive, right? If it sees one game of a player and rates their performance, it's not going to predict well how they're going to play in future games, or even more than that. Give it 5 games. I don't think it's going to too quickly cotton on to how strong a player is. And so I wanted to develop a new system, and I came at it from a very different direction. And that direction was, first, I built a strong algorithm, not a perfect one. Because a perfect algorithm will say this move wins, this move ties, this move loses. If there are no wins, play one of the ties, and it will have trouble differentiating between ties because it understands they're all ties. I wanted a system that can rank, a pressuring tie as better than an under pressure tie, right? Straightforward stuff. So I built an algorithm that is very good but not perfect. To get a sense of its strength, bots like Spade are on what I consider level 2 thinking, or what the programming is kind of level 2 thinking. That bots like Shadow Spade, which only played a little bit, is level 3 thinking. This algorithm's level 4 thinking. I think it is very strong. It is definitely imperfect. Sometimes it will recommend moves that, lose when there are ties available, but it is, I think, a very strong algorithm. It's going to have a very good sense of what's right in a position. And it's going to have a good sense of the differences between moves. So what it does is each move a player makes, say this position, it's going to rate every possible move Akiyama could make, all 28 of them. And it's going to give each of them a score. Then it's going to look at what move he played and what was the best score available and take the difference. So if you always make the best move available, the difference will be 0 and your score will be 0. Low scores are better. The further off you are from what it thinks the perfect move is, the more it will start taking away points. and it covers the first two-thirds of the game because the last three moves are usually just correctly played. Um, and so it takes the first six moves of the game and it just compares for each player the first three moves. How well did you do compared to what was available? So, as an example, I played my Triad Wars 15 game against Wavy a day ago, and he came in with a really bad hand. I think he card selected it, and it just had a big right weakness. He clearly, didn't put that much time into it, which gave me a free safe starter, which I took. Now, I had two safe starters, and this said both of them were equally strong. Either one I made, I would have gotten full credit. And he was in a really tough spot. And so all his moves were rated pretty low scores. But he found a move that was basically the best available. So he gets full credit for that move. He's in trouble. But he's not in trouble because he made a bad move. He's in trouble because his hand is poor. And it rates you very much based on the moves you make. So it said he played a great move. It rates that move really highly. His next move, he was again in a really tough situation. His first turn had mitigated as much of the pressure as he could, but his hand was still really weak, and he was still under a significant amount of pressure. And it said there are a few moves that are right around the tying and losing border. Incidentally, the move I thought he should make was losing for him. It was really easy to blow this position. I think I would have blown it if I was him. He made one of those moves right on that border between tying and losing. It happened to be losing, and I happened to find the win, but it thinks he played a good move, right? And the quality measure would say, well, he played a losing move, it's going to punish him. This measure would say, there were three or four moves that it's really hard to tell which ones were tying and losing. They were all right on that border. And making one of those moves instead of another is not particularly indicative of how you played, as it's still really hard to fully see all the consequences of each move, and his move looked only a little bit worse than the ones that actually tied, as well as this algorithm could tell. So it ended up rating Wavy as having played a really great game, like a really high level game, even though he lost. And the quality measure cannot do that. In fact, this measure, which I'm calling skill, has had a bunch of really interesting outputs. It can say someone won, but it actually thinks the other player played better. Now, that might sound crazy, but it could also make sense predictively, right? Let's say Delial loses to Noob Squall 36 or whatever, right? It's probably going to look at the game and be like, Noob Squall won, but Delial's the better player. And that's going to be more predictive moving forward. Now, usually, a weaker player beats a better player. It will usually think the weaker player played better in that specific game. But it has the potential to say it just thinks the better player was better despite the result. It can say someone played a clearly stronger game even though it ended up in a tie. And I think this may sound to some people like a weakness of the system, but to me, it sounds like a huge strength, and I'm really excited about it. The most interesting result it popped out was from Triad Wars 15 round one so far, was in the Vid Slash game. I thought Vid played a great game. I've made a video that will come out at some point. I thought Vid made a great game, and I thought his hand lined up so well with Slash's, and he really played it so that he could really punish what Slash was doing. It actually identifies Slash as being the slightly stronger player in that game. That sounds weird to me. I think Vid played a great game, and I think he was the better player in that game. But if you treat this as predictive, it took a game that Slash lost and still thought he was an elite player and playing at a slightly higher level than Vid. That might be just right, you know? Like, there's a case that's wrong, but it also might just be right and might be really sharp of it to get from just a single game. Obviously, single games are going to vary. I don't want to read too much into anything like that. And I do think it was wrong. I think Vid played a better game, but it recognized what Slash was doing and why it would have value, even if it didn't work. And that's pretty cool. So I'm really pleased with this new skill measure. To give a sense of the scale, so far, no game has been rated worse than a 7. So my scale is essentially 0 to 7. Potentially games could score worse than a 7, but 0 to 7. I don't know how to like say intuitively how much the difference between 0 and 7 is worth, but I think in general, hmm, no, I don't have a good enough sense to make an estimation here. So I'll just say the games it rates best, it thinks are perfect, it gives a 0. The games it's seen that it thinks are weakest played by a player, it gives a 7. And in general, I think a 6 is a pretty poor game. Like the player played in a way where they should really lose that game almost every time, which all of us are going to do at some point. Um, a 5, I think, is still a poor game. Though interestingly, my biggest sample of games so far is the 15 game Turds Akiyama match, and over those 15 games, none of them ever scored worse than a 5. The lowest scores were like a 4.6 or 4.5 or something for a game. So for the really top players, the range was kind of, I don't know if either of them had quite a 0, though they had some very low scores. Maybe the lowest was like 0.4 and the highest was like 4.4 or something. And that was the range they landed in. And on net for the match, they both averaged kind of a 2 point something. As another example, the Delial DJ match, which just happened as I record this, was a phenomenally played match. Delial averaged a 1.2 for the whole match, or sorry, 1.5 for the whole match, and DJ averaged a 1.8. During the Turds Akiyama match, Turds also had a 5 game run where he averaged a 1.5. We have seen this before, but that seems just a phenomenal score for a 5 game run. So that hopefully gives some sense of scale. To put it again, I think a 7 is a game the player deserves to lose basically every time. A 6 is a game they deserve to lose most of the time against a, normal strength, and the site is very strong right now, but normal strength opponents. A 5 is a game they are kind of lucky to save. A 4 is a pretty reasonable game. And once we get into the 3 range, I think this is good triple triad. The 2 range is very good. The 1 range is great, and the 0 to 1 range is close to perfect. Some games are much more easier to play perfect than others. This is not to say a single game tells you, the skill of a player. And as said, the Turds Akiyama match, they both ranged from about 0.5 to about 4.5. And so there is definitely significant range in game playing between the same players. That's a sense of the scale. Is there anything else I wanted to say here? Ray Aminator played his Triad Wars 15 game and just felt he couldn't see anything. That just nothing was clicking in his head. He was having trouble seeing a move or two ahead. And looking at the move order, it looked like a kind of normal game. He loses. Sir Smokes plays a really nice game, but it didn't look that bad. But he thought this was just a horrendous game where he couldn't see or do anything. Notably, this system thought it was a 6. It thought he was right, that it was a really, really badly played game by him, even though a quick skim could say it looked normal. This is not to insult his play. I think Ray has been playing awesome recently, deservedly player of the month, crushed me in a game that will be going up eventually. Everything's on, various delay, because I try to stay with a queue coming up so that if I don't make anything for a few weeks, I don't have any problems. Uh, but this is to say, I think Ray has been playing great, but in a game where he couldn't see anything, it correctly identified he didn't see anything. And we're all going to have games like that, and they're really unpleasant to play. So, yeah, new skill rating. I'll probably be mentioning it in various videos, especially when I make, like, when Triad Wars 15 finishes and I do best matches of Triad Wars 15, talking about the best matches. I'm sure I'll bring this up as a measure of the best matches. As I said, an early contender is this Delial DJ match, because Delial averaging a 1.5 and DJ averaging a 1.8 is a just super duper high level of play. As I said, scores in the 2s are really good. Scores in the 3s, I think, are good. I think most games in the 3s, most players should be pretty happy with. And what I want to look at over time is how few games does this system need to generally have a good sense of how good a player is? Because I think it's much sharper to that than my prior systems are, I think. Now, I should get to it has a couple weaknesses. I think there are some players and plays that are sort of beyond its calculating horizon. I'd really like a system that could grab how good Seto is, and I'm just not sure I'm going to be able to ever build one because I build systems that are at least somewhat based on how I see the game, which means they're always going to think like I specifically play well. And I'm not building them intentionally to do that, but because they're built based on what I value and what I think is important to value, they're going to think players who play like me are playing well because they've been trained to do so. This one is strong enough. I think it's capturing more of what very different and creative players like Seto do, but I'm still never sure I'm going to fully get to a system that captures just how well a player like that plays. And so there's definitely stuff where it prefers conventional moves to unconventional moves. There are often spots where it said very unconventional moves and found really clever ideas. There was a position I was looking at with cards in 1, 2, and 9, and it said, ah, of course you play in 5. And I was like, what? And it turned out 5 was the only tie. It was a fantastic move. So we can definitely find offbeat ideas, but it should not be trusted to do so quite as much as some of the most creative players do. And I think that's it. I'm guessing in general about 4 will be an average score by skill rating for most players, and scores under that should be treated as pretty good. I also am very curious. One other thing I'm curious about is how much does it vary depending on how strong your opponent is, right? And so I might do tests of this with Bot Club, right? Take someone, have them play a match against one of the weakest members of Bot Club, then have them play a match against one of the stronger members of Bot Club. Does their skill rating stay the same? Does it think they showed similar skill in both games? Or does it say it's harder to put up these results the tougher the player? And maybe they'll be different. Either one seems plausible. I'm not entirely sure which way it'll go, but there we have it.